When we cannot forgive, ever wonder why you can't forgive? We're going to talk a little bit about the ego and why the ego in us makes it kind of difficult for us to understand the real meaning of forgiveness. Therefore, we sometimes can't forgive. What about fear? Let's talk about fixing a broken relationship, human consciousness, inner healing, trust, and trust in relationships is going to be a deep subject today in today's episode of For a Better Life podcast. Hey everyone, good morning. It's James Nussbaumer, and thank you for joining me this morning on another episode of a Better Life podcast. And today is Sunday, August 5th, bright and early in the morning. And the town here is outside my studio is getting going early because there's an event this morning in town with a church going by nearby. So if you hear some background static, I'm not using headphones, so I'm on a hands-free thing here. So, but let's get going here. And Ted and Janine, members of my mastermind group, had messaged me. They're from Sun City, Florida, a little bit somewhere outside of the Tampa area. And they wanted to know more about, asked if I could explain a little more on why is it difficult to forgive sometimes for us. Can you touch again on forgiveness and why sometimes we just don't really get it when we're trying to forgive someone, or others don't really get it when we're trying to forgive them, and so forth, and how that, understanding the real meaning of forgiveness can enhance a more lasting relationship, whether it's a love relationship with a sibling, with a friend, but basically with love relationships, I want you to think about, but even in the world with nations, arguing and conflicting against one another, but can't forgive or having a hard time at trust in a relationship, for example. Why can't we forgive when we're having a hard time in a relationship? Well, because the human consciousness, which is ego, the ego is a thought system that is man-made, and its foundation is built on doubt and fear and criticism and judgment and condemnation. And it has a hard time living in the present moment. The ego does. The ego likes to dwell on the past and fear the future. Therefore, it's always critical and judgmental of the past, and therefore fearful and doubting the future. And therefore, forgiveness is a very difficult practice for the ego-based thought system that we as humans have man-made ourselves ever since time has begun. I also want to touch on a principle from the Course in Miracles today, too, that I'm going to get to. The Course in Miracles can help us here understand a little bit more about where we're going with forgiveness and how to, move on and live a more successful life where we, just want to, if we can understand time a little bit better and what time is used for. And let me just add that the ego's idea, that thought system that's within us based on fear and doubt, we all have it, but some of us let that thought system control us more so than others do. But the ego's idea of forgiveness is the language part of our consciousness, of our human consciousness, that has an especially hard time living in the now or the present moment, often referred to in the Course in Miracles as the holy instant, which that's in another episode too, but I wanted to throw that out there if there's anyone, think, because I've gotten some messages there as well. Is the now comparable to the holy instant? Sure, it's just a word, the now. The now is an instant. This instant now, boom, then it's gone. Now there's another instant now, and it's gone. Now, if we can stay in the now. See, the ego can't stay in the now. The ego cannot stay in the present moment because it's a thought system that has a foundation of fear, doubt, and judgment and regret, because the ego is constantly regretting or judging the past, and constantly fearing or doubting the future. It cannot stay in the present moment now, but spirit can. So bear with me. And this is why I urge you to learn some kind of mindfulness training, because it gets you to that, I always like to say, that alpha state of mind, which is where your creativity sits. And your creativity within you does not sit in the past. It does not sit inside you in the future. It's within you now in this instant. Consider that between the time when we forgive and the time when we actually feel as though we can trust in relationships, we seem to insert an interval of time there, don't we? I mean, where real miracles are manifested. What I'm trying to say is, I mean that we are taught to forgive, followed by allowing a period of time to do its work. Makes sense, right? Because we were raised that way. And that's good psychological sense. But what could this work possibly be? In other words, we were taught to forgive, followed by allowing a period of time to do its work. Well, what could this work possibly be that this interval of time is intended to inspire? Now, that's a little thought-provoking, but bear with me. In reality, what I mean is we're all doing, in other words, in reality, true reality, where we are beyond the human body, in reality, all it's doing is enforcing our feeling that there is still something we need to withhold from our brother/sister, which is everyone we're connected to beyond the body. Let's take the body out of the picture for a minute when I say this. In reality, which is where reality is, beyond the body. In reality, all it's doing is enforcing our feeling that there is still something we need to withhold from those that we are truly connected with, which I call in my writings our brother, our sister. Now, I say brother and sister only because we're in this world where we live around masculine and female overtones. But in eternity, in true reality, there is no such thing as male and female. It's the one mind of creation where reality is, for those of you that follow my writings. But in reality, all it's doing is enforcing that feeling that there is still something we need to withhold from our brother, our sister. We maintain that the space keeps us separate, when really we're not separate, but we try to think that we are. But in this world, the ego only knows of separation. The ego cannot digest or understand wholeness of mind. By the way, here's a related article at my blog on how to begin fixing a broken relationship with love advice for inner healing and understanding the holy relationship. And you can find that article at jamesnussbaumer.com/fixing a broken relationship. That will take you that. I've got hundreds of articles at my blog, at my website. So once you get to my website and you get to my blog, you're always referred within my blog. There's other links to other articles. For example, if you want to look at that fixing a broken relationship, jamesnussbaumer.com/fixing broken relationship, you'll find it. And then within that article, I always have related articles, so you can go on and keep your education moving. So from this perception, what I'm trying to say about, if you're understanding what I mean by the ego based on doubt and fear. And by the way, before I continue here, I have to take a sip of my morning coffee. And the sun is just starting to creep up. It's here, it's August. I'm noticing, because I face directly to the east from my studio window here. And I'm noticing I get the sunrise every morning, which is so glorious and beautiful to me. But I'm noticing that the sun is rising further to the south now as we're moving towards the end of the summer. So anyways, let's get back to this. Therefore, you cannot perceive of gaining the peace of freedom by false forgiveness. And, the forgiveness that the ego lives by, based on I judged you as doing wrong and you hurt me, and therefore, if you don't tell me, you're going to need to tell me you're sorry, or I can never forgive you. And we're always holding somebody for something that they have to do, or for example, that they need to pay some form of penance. Forgiveness by spirit means overlooking the ego-based mind in that person and in yourself, and going beyond the body to who that person really is, which is your brother, sister, which I mean brother slash sister, which to me, I'm in my writings that I progressed, that I say, is the connection of mind behind the body that you have, which is all spirit. There's no ego. That's the now, the present moment where spirit is. And that is eternity. And that is the real world. And while we're in this world, our closest glimpse that we can have of eternity as humans is to experience the absolute now. When you experience the absolute now, or what the Course in Miracles calls the holy instant, that is as a human being, that's the closest you will get to experiencing eternity. But as you practice it more often, and as you glimpse it more often, the glimpses start to lengthen, and then they become moments and minutes, and you learn to live your life in the holy instant, the now, the present moment. Does that mean you should not be concerned about the future for your planning and all this while you're in this world? No, absolutely not. Does that mean you should not learn off of your mistakes from the past? No, certainly. Dwell just a little bit on your past mistakes, but don't dwell too deeply where you're just criticizing yourself to death. Learn off of those past mistakes. Bring them to the now. And that's why I encourage mindfulness meditation, because it will teach you to go within and listen for the answers. So therefore, there is no gain in the interval that I had spoken of that you think lies between the giving and receiving. That is experienced as a feeling of sacrifice, like I had said, or someone owes you penance because they harmed you, or you owe someone some sacrifices, or you need to sacrifice in order to gain. And where sacrifice and suffering means that's what's necessary to get ahead in life, due to the anxiety and that just builds more anxiety within ourselves. No, now when I say sacrifice, that's another word. Do we do things that we really don't like to do because we need to get ahead in life? Sure we do. That's not the type of sacrifice that I'm talking about. And that's not the type of suffering I'm talking about. I'm talking about undue, unnecessary sacrificing, unnecessary suffering, unnecessary scolding of yourself, scolding someone else, berating someone else, berating yourself. When we can't forgive, it looks like this. And I'm going to say this, and I quote, by the world. If I do this favor for her now, how long will it be till she reciprocates, if she does at all? Think about that. See, it says when we can't forgive, we're looking at things like this. If I do this for her now, she's probably never going to give back to me, so why should I even do it for her now, and why should I forgive her? Now, see, that's the ego-based way of thinking. That's human behavior. But we're always going to have that kind of a little darkness in us that has us thinking that way. But when we kind of think that way, when we can immediately in the now jump in and say, whoa, wait a minute, there's that ego sneaking up on me. All right, calm down, ego. Kind of like a bratty child that you have to calm down and say, it's going to be okay, just calm down. And then spirit takes over. So sometimes treat those ego thoughts just like the bratty child that you have to calm down a little bit and let him know or her know that it's going to be okay. I hope that makes sense, does it? And I really hope so. But this ego-based thought process has us seeing a hopeful or an eventual salvation rather than immediate results. Does anyone really know what salvation is? I mean, we preachers everywhere are preaching salvation will come to you. But what is salvation? I mean, do we have to wait until some time in the future to experience salvation? Or can we experience it now in our life while we're living in this world and where we're touching eternity, the real world? You know, the ego-based thought process has us perceiving things like, you know, well, let me back up and say we are trading a perceived loss for a perceived gain sometime in the unspecified future is what we're doing. We think we must lose now to gain in the future. So don't get me wrong here. I'm not saying that you should not give up a few things because you're working towards a potential goal. Sometimes you've got to weigh some things out and say, well, you know, maybe I need to put this aside for a while and focus more here so I can get to this next level. That's not the type of perceived loss to perceived gain that I'm talking about. But let's think for a moment what A Course in Miracles states in this spiritual metaphysical principle that's very simple yet so profound. Time and space are an illusion which takes different forms. And I'll repeat that. Time and space are an illusion which takes different forms. You know, let me go on and say we see the time as a possible cooling off, so to speak, period, or a time to gather one's thoughts, if you will. And then when the time comes in closer, we start to see it as space. Now, let me go further and say when we can't forgive, the thinking seems to be, I'm okay with her, but I just need a little space. Okay, we always want to seem to incorporate or insert that space thing. And when we want to put in that space thing, that just opens the door for more ego-based thought to enter. The space and time are seen as physical, which is, you know, all they both can be while we're in this world, and that's what space and time are. They make up this world. But we think that they are real and necessary in order to have trust in relationships, especially the love relationship. You know, the distance we feel when we can't forgive that must be kept between us is perceived as time and keeps us external to one another. Excuse me a moment. And so far, I hope that Ted and Janine of Sun City, Florida, I hope I'm starting to answer your question. But I feel there's still more that I need to do to answer that question on forgiveness, so let me proceed. You know, the distance that we feel when we can't forgive, in other words, when we feel we need that space, because we just can't forgive, we need space. Well, we're allowing the ego to take control because the ego is about space and time. But on the other hand, spirit can use time for our benefit, which that's in another podcast where we dwell just on that. But today we're talking about understanding more about the now, the holy instant, the present moment where forgiveness takes place by overlooking and looking beyond ego-based behavior. So the distance that we feel when we can't forgive that must be kept between us is perceived as time, yes, and keeps us external to one another. In other words, keeps us separate from one another. Anytime we put space in there, it's going to separate us. This makes real trust in relationships impossible. I'll repeat that. The space you put between you makes real trust in relationships impossible. We don't believe total trust in relationships can solve a problem because fear and doubt is occupying the space we think we need and keeping us from maximizing our real and full potential as lovers in this relationship, if it's a love relationship. Or it can be a world relationship, nations against nations, business colleagues against other business colleagues, businesses against businesses that are making deals with each other. Whatever it is, and speaking of nations, let's think about this. Will our nation, which seems as the leader in the free world? Will our nation, the United States of America, which seems as the leader in the free world, ever trust so-called volatile countries to put down their nuclear weapons as well as their research on nuclear weapons? Will we ever trust? I don't think so. I mean, we hopefully one day we will all trust each other, but we're getting to that point, and I don't want to go off on a political tangent here because that's not the purpose of this. But we're leading to that, and times are better today than they were centuries. I mean, think back centuries ago when the Crusades were going on, over things like religion. I mean, whoa. I mean, just if you think back how we have progressed, we're moving towards wholeness. We really are. So, and that's an important point. And I use that as our country, the United States, because we're the #1 leader in the world. But then I say this again, will our nation, the United States, which is the leader of the free world, ever trust so-called volatile countries to put down their nuclear weapons? Or will we always have doubt in the back of our mind? Will we always be fearing the future? Let's see, that's a human instinct. We can't really get away from it totally while we're humans, but we can learn to curb it down a little bit. We can learn to put it on the back burner and let spirit be more in charge of the cooking we do, I guess we could say. Okay. Excuse me again, I clear my throat out. I better take another sip of my morning coffee. My black Maxwell House coffee, I just love. I don't know why. And like I said before, there's a reason for that, but that's what I choose. Anyways, so this leads us to think it's a little safer to be more watchful over our own interests, which is also seen as separate. Additionally, isn't this really the way that we want it to be? It seems as though that we feel we want or need this fear and this doubt in order that we may feel some strength. When this happens, it's a huge trap. It's a pitfall that you will never see salvation unless you can bring the idea of salvation out of the future, which to the ego seems as impossible. In other words, we seem to be wanting to pray for salvation sometime in the future, somewhere out there in the universe where we go to one day or whatever. That's what we think. But if we can bring salvation out of the future, if we can take the idea of salvation out of the ego-based thought system, if we can take the idea of salvation out of the power of the ego within us, if we can take salvation out of what we hope for the future, if we can take salvation away from the ego and accept salvation right now, in this moment now, within us, as spirit in charge of us while we're in this world, over the ego, where the ego, I like to use, takes a back seat and spirit does the driving through our journey through life. Isn't that salvation while we live our days on this earth? This is something that the habits of successful people everywhere strive to get a grip on, and they do. You will always be living for future gain and never see it as immediate if you do not start perceiving it, and thus will be afraid to ever have true salvation. In other words, if you don't bring salvation out of the future and start living in the now and see yourself as living in salvation now, where spirit runs you, but accepting the fact, on the other hand, that you do have an ego, and that ego sometimes will raise its eyebrow of doubt, and that ego sometimes will nudge you and say it's fearful. But for the most part, if you can say that spirit is in charge, and spirit is telling the ego to calm down, ego, it's going to be okay. And an ego looks up at you at spirit and says, okay, there you go. You got salvation right there because you're living by spirit rather than living by ego-based thought that does nothing but keep us doubting, nothing but keep us fearing, nothing but causing separation, and nothing but putting space in our relationships. Space between our love with our spouse, space between our love towards our brother, sister, space between our nations. If we can't see salvation now, if we cannot bring salvation out of the future and bring it to us now, we're only living in a world of separation. And separation is nothing but conflict. And conflict is caused by doubt and fear. That's the ego-based thought system. This is how the ego keeps you away from trusting the idea of cause and effect, by making you fear its effects. Cause and effect. And that's another episode too on cause and effect. We don't have time to go on that today because that's not today's subject. And I'll repeat that though. This is how the ego keeps you from trusting in cause by making you fear its effects. Well, here's a related article too I want to add, very thought-provoking article, also at my website. Like I told you, I've got hundreds of articles at my website, jamesnussbaumer.com, for positive change you can put in to be enlightened. And it's really will help you understand more about what we're talking about today. But I'm getting ready to close now, and as I do, I want to add again, Ted and Janine of Sun City Center, Florida. Thank you for participating and getting involved and messaging me. And by the way, if you're at YouTube right now, listening to me, there will be a link in the description box at YouTube down below that I truly recommend. It's about relationship rescue, and there's an image of a nice, well, if you're at my website right now, let me back up. If you're at my website listening to this blog, because I'm also inserting or embedding this podcast into a blog article at my blog. So if you're listening to this at my website, there's an image of a young couple, and there's a little line under there. It says more here on relationship rescue. If you click on that, it takes you to some wonderful content to take a look at on helping you rebuild your relationship with your spouse, lover, marriage, whatever it might be, or to maintain it, to enhance it, whatever. And like I said, if you're at YouTube, in the description area down below, that link is there for you, relationship rescue. And also, if you're at YouTube, in the description area down below, you might have to click on show more. I have the link to this article version of this podcast there as well. And I also will have the principle from the Course in Miracles in that description area too. If you're at my website and you're listening to this, you're seeing the words around this podcast, all that information is there for you. I hope you'll support my work. I'd like to add that, if you buy all my books, right now, my first 3 books are out, published by Ozark Mountain Publishing Company, a company I just have a tremendous relationship with. They are a mainstream publisher. My first book, The Master of Everything, A Story of Mankind in the World of Illusion We Call Life, is the subtitle. And the second book, its sequel, which I think is strong, Mastering Your Own Spiritual Freedom, and it has a subtitle, Lessons from A Course in Miracles. And my third book, which I'm so thrilled with, I feel this is the icing on the cake for this trilogy. And I call these 3 books a trilogy. It's called And Then I Knew My Abundance. All 3 books published by Ozark Mountain Publishing Company. And at my website, you'll find links everywhere on how to buy them books through Amazon. They're on sale in stores everywhere books are sold, everywhere. So if you go into your bookstore, would you do me a favor? And my books are not on those shelves in that bookstore. Would you please go to the counter and say, hey, could you get James Nussbaumer's books in here? You see, that's up to the author to do. Of course, the publisher surely does its work too, but the author needs to do the legwork. And, for those of you that know my story, I'm kind of new and up and going, so I haven't really gotten the legwork done yet that I need to do to get around everywhere to all the corners of the world and put my, go into individual bookstores everywhere and talk to them and say, and do the book signings everywhere and all that, and get my books in there. So maybe wherever you live at, in your area, could you go into your local bookstore and say, hey, can you get this guy's books on your shelves? They're awesome. And I will say they are awesome. And for those of you that know my story, know that I'd handwritten each one of these books from prison, where I spent 8 years in an Ohio prison for a foolish securities violation. I don't want to dwell on that now, because that story is told in my first book, The Master of Everything. And if you already know me, I don't want to bore you with those facts again. But if you're just getting to know me, I suggest reading the first book first, but any one of them would do. And there's more books on the way. I'm just so thrilled. I'm just overwhelmed with excitement. And I love these podcasts because I feel I'm connecting with you right now who are listening to me. I can see you. I have a picture of you. I feel I'm connecting with you. Ted and Janine of Sun City, Florida. I hope that answers your question today on forgiveness. By the way, follow me on Twitter, please. For some reason, I'm engaging well on Twitter, Facebook as well. Please follow my YouTube channel as well. And, I also, if you read, I guess let me get back to what I was saying. If you read every one of my books, all of them that I would ever write in the future, I still don't have the answers to all your questions, and I don't claim to ever be. I'm writing interesting books about what's helped me overcome adversity and understanding my own spiritual enlightenment, and I'm hoping that that helps you. But so I also, at my website, you'll notice that I refer other authors' products, books, videos, systems that they have, whatever it is, but I've thoroughly checked them out, and I believe in their products, and I recommend them to you, but not everything is for each individual. So I have, a few different products that you always notice in my articles that if you need help in that area. And somewhere these authors are recommending my books to their readers and followers as well. And isn't really that the way the world works? The universe works, giving and receiving. Well, I hope this makes sense today. It's been fun. I always enjoy these Sunday morning podcasts. I look forward to them every Sunday, and I will continue to. I know we got off path for a little bit. We were on Mondays for a while, and then there was one time we were on a Saturday, but we got this all worked out. Many people said they preferred on Sunday mornings. So I hope this all made sense to you today on forgiveness, living in the now, understanding a little bit more about the ego. And we can say, an abusive thought system to us. I hope that made sense. I appreciate you, and I've got to run. God bless. James Nussbaumer signing off.